Is Eric Holder, former Attorney General of the United States under President Barack Obama. Mr. Holder, you just heard from the mayor of Newark, New Jersey. Let's start with his case. The president's former personal lawyer, who is now the acting Attorney General for the district in New Jersey, Alina Habba, confirmed Barack's arrest with a social media post in all caps stating, quote, "No one is above the law." The arrest of an elected official is always a sensitive matter. What's your reaction to what the Trump Justice Department has done?
Well, I think what we saw the Trump Justice Department do yesterday is consistent with what they have been doing around the country. The arrest of that judge in Wisconsin, the attempts to consolidate power. You know, I saw Homan in that earlier piece talk about this is all about politics. No, this is all about power. The Trump administration wants to acquire power to do the kinds of radical things that they have been doing on a whole variety of fronts, and certainly with regard to immigration enforcement. You know, as best I can tell, I've looked at the tapes now, and I wasn't there, but I've certainly seen a lot of tapes. The arrest certainly was affected when the mayor was outside of the premises, outside of the property. And it's hard for me to understand how there was a trespass charge there. And it also strikes me that he was one of a group of people there, and he was the one who was picked to be arrested. I think they're trying to send a message. They're trying to intimidate people, and they're trying to use this intimidation to consolidate their power.
And as we see the tape here, there were 3 members of Congress there with him. 3 Congress people were there. He was the one picked out and were arrested. They were all standing together outside of the perimeter. Now, the same day, I waited to ask you this, the same day the Trump DOJ was arresting the mayor of Newark, top White House advisor Stephen Miller said the administration was looking at ways to suspend due process for migrants, claiming it was up to the courts whether they would be forced to invoke emergency powers to suspend habeas corpus. Some judges handling migrant cases have expressed concern this administration is already ignoring due process. What do you make of this extraordinary statement?
Well, it is an extraordinary statement, and it's an extremely troubling one. The right of habeas corpus is in our Constitution. The founders decided that this was something that needed to be expressly set out as a right that people in the United States have to invoke to revoke habeas corpus, to suspend habeas corpus. You need to have proof of an invasion and also an indication that public safety is at risk. I don't think you have an indication that either of those 2 prongs of the test have been met. Stephen Miller is many things. He's not a real good lawyer, if in fact he is a lawyer. I don't think he is. But he's also not a good reader of the Constitution if he thinks that there is a basis for them to suspend habeas corpus. That has only happened, I think, 4 times in our history, once during the Civil War, the last time during the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So we're in a fundamentally different place than those 4 other occasions.
Now, getting back to the Trump Justice Department, this week Trump named Fox News host Jeanine Pirro to be interim U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. The Fox News host who pushed 2020 election conspiracies replaces Ed Martin, who before his tenure had represented January 6th defendants. Meantime, Trump's new FBI director, Kash Patel, showed up for a Senate budget hearing this week without a budget plan. According to NBC News, he's receiving director's briefing just twice a week and has been traveling the country attending sporting events with celebrities. You know how the Justice Department is supposed to run. You ran it. What is happening with this one?
Well, it's not reassuring to hear all these indications about what the FBI director is doing. I can tell you that every FBI director that I worked with showed up at 8:30 every morning for a briefing on the national intelligence estimates that we received just that day to understand what was going on with regard to the threat situation around the world and domestically as well. It's my understanding that Patel does not make all those meetings unless there were health reasons or somebody was out of town. Those meetings were held, as I said, every day at 8:30 at FBI headquarters. These are not serious people. they are there for reasons of loyalty to the president, not because they are planning to do something that's good for our justice system and for the people of this nation. I mean, Ed Martin was an absurd pick as the interim U.S. attorney. The next pick, I think, is I can't imagine that there's a good basis for her confirmation. I mean, she had a career as a Westchester DA, but for the last 20 years or so, she has been a TV personality who has really spouted some pretty bizarre things. And apparently among those, she's an election denier. Now, I was the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. That's an extremely important job. It's the largest U.S. attorney's office in the country. And you need somebody there who is going to be a lawyer for the people and not an arm of the president. And I think that Martin, as well as his potential successor, are people who see themselves as representatives of Donald Trump, as opposed to enforcers of the law and people who want to protect due process.
Now, you're on the front lines of the fight for democracy as chair of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. This week, we got good news out of Alabama, where a panel of 3 federal judges ruled the state must maintain a Voting Rights Act compliant congressional map. And in Florida, where a bill to require proof of citizenship to patterned after a Trump executive order failed to advance in the legislature. However, there is real fear that bills similar to the Florida measure are gaining momentum in other states, and that this Trump administration will continue to do what it can do to interfere with how elections are conducted. What's your level of concern about this right now?
Well, I'm very concerned. I'm really concerned about what I see at the Justice Department, where the voting section in the Civil Rights Division has essentially been turned from protecting people and their right to vote to trying to find election fraud, which the Brennan Center has indicated. You're more likely to be hit by lightning than to cast a fraudulent in-person ballot. And nevertheless, they shifted all the Justice Department voting rights section personnel to that focus. And I'm concerned about what that means then in terms of what the Justice Department will do to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to cast a ballot. Then you see this executive order from the president where he tries to claim that he's going to change the whole electoral process in the states as well as with regard to federal elections. And the president simply doesn't have that power. States govern their own electoral processes, and Congress is the prime determinant as to how federal elections are run. But I think they're doing all of this. Again, you have to look the through line through all of this stuff. The arrest of the mayor, what we're now talking about now is the acquisition of power. That's what this is all about, power, the use of power, and to try to put in place a more authoritarian regime than this nation has ever seen. And so all of us have to be prepared to fight against that which they are trying to do. If we're complacent, they will be allowed to do it. If we're silent, that will be seen as acquiescence. So people need to do all that they can in any way that they can to oppose these moves.
Finally, in the next segment, I'm going to share my thoughts about Tyrese Nichols. 3 Memphis police officers charged with beating Nichols to death after a traffic stop were acquitted of state charges this week by an out-of-town jury. Many of us see the officers' upcoming sentencing on federal convictions as a last chance for real justice. But this is happening as Trump is gutting the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division that built the case against the officers during the Biden administration, turning its core mission on its head by shifting focus to alleged anti-white and anti-Christian discrimination, not anti-civil rights discrimination for all people, including blacks and gays and Jews. And it operated in a robust fashion when you were Attorney General. What's your reaction to what is happening now with the Justice Department Civil Rights Division being changed in terms of its focus, outright being stated, as I said, where their focus is moved to other areas, and you have a situation where there would not even be federal convictions on Tyree Nichols had it not been a Civil Rights Division that was focused, that included police abuse where there was found?
Yeah, I've often called the Civil Rights Division the crown jewel of the Justice Department. And if one looks at the origins of the Civil Rights Division and then the history of that division under Democratic as well as Republican presidents, this administration is doing things totally inconsistent, both with that history and with the origin of the division. The focuses that they are placing, the emphases that they are trying to put in place are inconsistent with the way in which that division has always operated, and I fear puts at risk vulnerable populations. Those populations that are subject to all kinds of discrimination, hate crimes, a whole variety of things that, again, Republican as well as Democratic administrations have put emphases on and put resources behind. This administration, again, it's all about power. And they want to make sure that those parts of the population that they think support them will get protection, and those parts of the population that they think are not going to be supportive of them do not get that kind of protection. They're making very ideological determinations about what they're going to do with the Civil Rights Division, and again, that is not something that we've ever seen before.
Attorney General Eric Holder, many thanks for sharing your analysis of the news with us and our viewers this hour. Thank you.